thank Acgc for this opportunity, and we're proud to be able to sponsor this and to be part of this initiative, and hopefully this is the beginning of a long partnership. I know there's a lot of uncertainty about what FEWise does. I'm confronted with this every single day. Are we a legal tech company? What do we do? Are we an AI company? So basically it's very simple. If you look at the regulatory value chain, starting from where law is made by the lawmakers or regulators or other sources of law, to the end users, be it the public or be it corporates, we're kind of exactly the point of content providers. This is something that I discovered 7-8 years ago that was lacking on the African continent. As I practiced law across many countries, I kind of realized that finding the laws, finding just access to justice was so difficult, and that's where it all starts. So we thought, can we solve this problem? Because eventually with everything that's happening with technology and software coming up, I mean, it can't work in an empty space. You can't have a contract management system without contracts. And the same applies to all the legal tech software coming up. What you need is basically the cornerstone, the foundation, which is the law itself. And that's a big problem on the African continent. Some countries obviously are better in it. If you look at Kenya, Kenya is doing a brilliant job with Kenya laws, where everything is available from court cases to the laws and the regulations. But in other countries, it's extremely complicated. I remember when I arrived in Tanzania as a very young lawyer in 1998, and I asked for a copy of the company's code that the librarian sent me to a partner, famous, he's a former East African chairman of the East African Bar Association, Dr. Kapinga, and he was the only one who had a consolidated version of the Companies Act. So that was coming from Europe, that was an eye-opener for me. At the same time, when you were negotiating with regulators, finding out that certain regulators didn't have full knowledge of all the directives that they had issued previously. So how do you solve this problem? Because there's many sources of law, as you know. There's laws, there's regulations, there's supranational law, there's jurisprudence, but also, and this is not just in African emerging markets, but also in other regions, there's customary law, there's traditions, there's practice. And so how do you actually set up to come up with legal information that is relevant? So when we set out 8 years ago, there basically wasn't AI, or there wasn't anything to start from. So where do you start? You start with lawyers. So what we developed 8 years ago was basically collaborating, partnering up with lawyers to actually give direct answers, just like any one of you would call a lawyer and ask him your questions. So it was kind of a ChatGPT, but made in a very human way. So this is what we do, but I'm going to skip this. And I'm going to show you straight what we did. So we basically started mapping about 5,000 questions that any company, any enterprise is confronted with in any country. And we started populating the answers for that and maintaining the answers together with the top lawyers in each country. This is a screenshot of data protection in Kenya, and obviously who do we work with for data protection in Kenya? With OK. And that's where it all started, and this is still a flagship offering. Now, once you've got all that, there's plenty of things you can do. You can build reports. This is, for example, a screenshot whereby you can build a report across 30 topics, be it lending, security, corporate, data protection, internet law, corporate, litigation, contracts. You then dig deeper into what you want, and you can basically build a report online with the current state of the law across these topics today in 25 countries. But we're not out there to replace lawyers, obviously. We don't do projects, we don't do transactions, we don't do litigation, we don't draft contracts. So we also a channel towards lawyers. So we've got a database of 3,000 lawyers on the African continent, which are all vetted, on which we do due diligence. And then we provide and we follow them obviously, and we provide their full contact details, their profiles, the details of their law firm, and that's kind of an add-on. So as we went along with doing this, we kind of realized that the bare sources of law, just the laws and the regulations themselves, that even listing those is already a hassle. And we're doing that with all the lawyers, so we started building legal registers. Legal registers across all the topics, across all the sectors on the FME continent. So basically today you can just log into FEWise, you can say, I need a legal register on data protection in these countries, or I need a legal register on, I'm an energy company active in Mozambique, and I need to know what are the laws and the regulations that apply to me. And then you've got access to the text, and you can actually download them in Excel. And that's where it all started, actually, where the future of law or the future of FEWise lies for us. Basically, it's once you start doing this, you realize that with natural language being processing and machine learning being released on top of those primary sources of law, you can do lots of stuff. Originally, I must say, I was against this. From a legal research perspective, listing all the laws, listing jurisprudence, not sure what you get out of that, unless you're kind of a real professional lawyer and you know what you're looking for. So I was much more a fan of the Q&A, the practical guidance. But eventually now with technology I started seeing the opportunities, because what we then started doing was the ability to search into laws using artificial intelligence in any language. So in FEWise you can basically search in Chinese directly in the laws of Congo. So everything is translated and everything is fully available in any language. So this is an example of a search in Congo. I'm not sure what I'm looking for. I'm looking for money laundering, and you basically see all the responses in English. I could have done this in Chinese, even if it's for the DRC. And this is something we started testing 2 years ago with artificial intelligence, with an artificial intelligence company, and we basically acquired this company about a year ago, and now we're making wonders. Because what we're now doing, and the piece of the practical guidance of the lawyers is still very important, and it ties in about with all the discussions we had about AI yesterday. Because what we're now building is what we call a smart data warehouse, in which we basically, and that's a massive task in itself. We work with regulators, we work with official state gazette printers. In Nigeria, for example, the state gazettes are only available in print, so we need to have them scanned. There's always discussions about, that's very interesting with regulators, yeah, but are you allowed to do this? But law is supposed to be public and there is no intellectual property on the law. But it's interesting that in some countries we face challenges because there's regulators saying no, it doesn't belong, it belongs to us. But the law is actually the law. So, but we basically put everything in the smart data warehouse, and that's where artificial intelligence starts playing a role. So I'll just give you some practical examples. You know, there's a Finance Act coming out and it's amending 20 laws. We all know that, it's happening. So are these laws consolidated? No. Can you consolidate them manually? Yes, but obviously we've got laws, companies that can be amended like 20 times in the course of years. So all this is now automated. So the system recognizes the Finance Act is amending 200 laws and will automatically amend those and make consolidated versions. Remember the East African law reports of the past, this is now full-time. This is now available live at any given time, not once off. But what it also starts doing is it recognizes links. So for example, if jurisprudence is referring to the Labor Act, it will automatically underline the Labor Act and make the link to the Labor Act. So this was work that was previously done manual, but now we just throw all that in the system, and the system will basically find links between sources of law. There's lots of other stuff you can do, but basically once you've got all that in a smart data warehouse, you can pull it out in any form. You can put it out on a platform like I've just shown you, but you can also put it out in the form of compliance risk management plans. You can put it out in the form of dashboards, and I'll show you a few examples. So this is something that we started playing with, I think in November last year, and I'll show you some of the new products we've built on that. So at the core of FEWise is good old school legal research. So lots of people always tell me like, wow, it's fancy what you guys are doing, and it must be exciting, but 90% of what we do is boring work. It's really kind of consolidating the legislation, and we've got editors, and I'm so grateful for the lawyers we partner up with, because it's thanks to them that we can do this, that we get access to the regulators, that we can get all the sources in. I'm lucky enough now to work with the tech guys that do the fancy stuff, but I'm grateful to everyone who's putting that left piece into the data warehouse. Now what can we do with this? This is a data warehouse. it's not magic, it's simple, but it's coming close. Because basically, all documents are uploaded automatically, it recognizes which language it is, it converts the documents into machine-readable format. What is machine-readable format? It's text format, it's HTML. So the problem, as you know, a regulator will publish something on their website and it's an image. We often encourage this, it's an image. So what do you do now? Do you type it over? No. So that image will be converted into machine-readable format. So everything we do is converted into text format, so you can copy-paste. Now, the system automatically recognizes the language, it will then automatically translate it into 28 languages, it makes all the links, it will consolidate everything, and this happens overnight in a matter of hours. So, once you've got this, you can now do really fancy stuff. This is something that we're bringing out very soon. Some clients are already testing it, but this is a regulatory monitoring on keywords or concepts. So on the left side, you can just choose your sources. So we've got the FUI's laws of monitoring, but you can do the official state gazettes, you can do jurisprudence, you can even say websites of certain regulators. And so basically all these sources you can now start monitoring, be it on keywords or be it on concepts, for example, energy concept as whole. You can create widgets, so here you see a widget whereby pledge in case law in Kenya. Vaccine, this is from a medical company using it. So vaccine, X-ray, oxygen, fire safety, so that we can basically start monitoring anything that comes out in any country, whether it's in jurisprudence or whether it's in laws or regulations, or they pinpoint us. Even our clients will tell us, we know this regulator is using a LinkedIn page to publish. Will you please make sure that everything that comes out of that LinkedIn page is monitored? This is something that, and then you can put alerts, and whenever you want to receive these alerts. So my comment of yesterday, that's going to move very quickly, this is something that we've built once you've got that smart data warehouse in a matter of weeks. So this is where artificial intelligence will be useful. You can create dashboards where it's very early stage, this is just a few tests, but you can just put your own algorithm as a corporate and say, you know, important for me is how many enforcement cases have there been in data protection. Yesterday we were talking about tools for corporate counsel. So this is a tool. You define yourself, your algorithm. What is your risk appetite? So once you define your risk appetite yourself, our system monitors everything and will build your dashboards for your board or for your own purposes. Trending topics, so basically you can actually start monitoring everything. What you can also do, and this from a compliance perspective is a big game changer. Compliance, legal regulatory compliance has always been a very manual process. It's building your legal registers. I was already talking about legal registers, but now you can automate your legal register. I'm active in this country, and these are my activities. It will automatically tell you what laws or regulations apply to you. We can then link it to our practical guidance. Remember where we started off? The lawyers are still doing this, so basically we can now say, okay, Data Protection Act, and you are collecting data, what is required, and link it to the practical guidance with a button. We can also build CRMPs. I think Alan yesterday spoke about CRMPs, so what is a compliant risk management plan in Excel. Lots of companies still do it in Excel, some companies do it in software. But we provide the content to that software. So basically this left file is a file of the Financial Intelligence Center Act, FICA of South Africa, quite famous in South Africa. Now this looks complicated, but it's not complicated. But it's actually lots of work to do this. When you have a law is often structured. So it's in PDF or whatever, so you need to put structure into it. So this machine automatically puts structure and say, this is a chapter, this is a section, this is a subsection, and it will understand the section, it will see how it relates to other sections, and it will actually make links and put it in plain English. So I can now pull with this, I can just pull the compliance risk management plan out of one law, the FICA, and it will give me this Excel, splitting everything completely, putting in plain English. The only thing a company still needs to do is saying, what is my risk appetite, what are my internal control environments, and how will I audit this? And then this is the next step. We spoke a lot about AI yesterday and generative AI. Will we use ChatGPT on our platform? No. Obviously, we're not going to give our database away, that's a risk, but also you need to guide AI. When you do generative AI, it's very important. So natural language processing is one part of AI, generative AI is the second part. You can only do this once you've got everything in machine-readable format, and you've got machine learning that understands legalistic English or French. So that's where it all starts. That's the first part. That's what we've covered. The second part is generative AI. That's a phase we're starting now, and that we hope to be ready with by mid next year. And this will basically be ask your question. The difference with ChatGPT and other generative AIs is that there's two big differences. We will not allow the system to make cross relations and to actually start hallucinating. So it will always mention when you ask what is the duration of a mining permit, it will tell you the duration of a mining permit in South Africa is, I don't know, CDH will know better, but it's 20 years because of section so much of the MPRDA. It will always give the source. But I found case law that says this, it will also give the source. It will not start giving you answers based on its own analysis. So it's pure legal research. So that's how we guide it. And the second thing, and that's again where I think FUIs is quite special, is that building that ecosystem. You remember where it all started, the practical guidance given by the lawyers? That's actually, so we've got hundreds of thousands of pages maintained together with lawyers, giving practical guidance, practical interpretation. And that will actually help the AI. It's training the AI, it's guiding the AI, and it's keeping the AI in pace. So that's really the next step. And we believe that, I think there were lots of discussions yesterday, but we believe that if you do it properly, this will be a game changer. But you need to do it properly, and you need to do it in collaboration with the legal fraternity, and you need to do it in collaboration with corporate counsel to see that it's in line with what is expected. You all know Glenn. I just wanted to finish with this picture. We've won the Innovation Award and the FT Legal Awards 3 times in a row now, and we won it again 2 weeks ago, and still to Glenda's surprise. If you've got any questions, we're around. We provide free demos, free trials on our platforms, on any of our platforms, so if you're interested, just speak to me. Or there's, I think, a small papers outside where there's a QR code where you can book a demo online. And we provide free trials for a week as well for unlimited users. So thank you so much, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'd like to talk to you about your AI actually, because we need my own work. I could use one of those. We can borrow it, we can be friends and borrow you. Thank you so much, that was really interesting. I hope you found that helpful and useful, and do please speak to Stephen or Glenda. They've got a table outside if you want to have a look further. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite our friends and colleagues at CDH to come up and give us a lesson of the day in project procurement and contract management. Over to you, folks. Do you want me to introduce you? Would you like to introduce yourselves? Introduce yourselves.
Good morning, everyone, and good to be in Kigali today. Our third time in Kigali, always great to be here. It's a wonderful city and great people. So I'm going to be the person from CDH to introduce the firm and also introduce the lecture, not really lecture, training. So we want to have an interactive training session with all the attendees on a topic for procurement and contract management. Just going into the details around more from an African perspective, so both Southern Africa, East Africa, how procurement can be utilized by governments also in ensuring we achieve the objectives, both domestic growth objectives for each country, but also regional development objectives through the AFCFTA. So maybe to first start off, in terms of introduction to CDH, clicker, and I haven't introduced myself. So I'm Jack Ferris. I'm a partner at Cliptech Halfway. I'm also the head of our industrials, manufacturing and trade sector, and I also sit on the firm's executive committee. So as CDH, we are Pan-African law firm, and I want to just ask the gentleman in the back to first just play that video, if you don't mind. So while we get it.
Visions are desires that flicker between a wish and intent. They are carvings waiting for the artisan's hand. One who is consumed by purpose. One who can bring vision to fruition. Cliff Decker Hofmeyer, incorporating Kieti law from vision to fruition.
From your vision to your fruition. And as a law firm, a Pan-African law firm, proudly Pan-African, established in South Africa with its headquarters in Johannesburg, with another office in Cape Town in Stellenbosch, an office in Nairobi, and soon to be also an office in Namibia. Ever expanding, making sure that we can provide a Pan-African legal support to our clients. Doesn't matter what the nature of the matter is, whether it's a project, whether it's policy advising work in developing new law, and advising governments with risk around investment structuring and BITs, or dispute settlement issues that we've been involved in. So we are a proud law firm operating on the continent, providing top quality legal advice on the continent. And just maybe to give some background to the firm. So our firm, as I mentioned, based in South Africa, but we have more than 300 lawyers. We have a network of relationship firms on the continent, stretching from the north to the west, to the east, and to Southern Africa. We pride ourselves in the quality of work that we do. We have top-tier clients that we service that are listed on the London Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, and on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We have a sector-based approach in how we provide services. So these are just some of the sectors that we offer services in. So it's a full-service law firm in all the practice areas, whether it's employment, dispute settlement, corporate and commercial, banking and finance, real estate, so you name it, we do it. The only thing we don't do is family work. And the criminal work, but white-collar crime, dealing with corporates and corporate investigations is also part of our service offering. As a firm, as I mentioned, we have a sector-based approach in the work that we do. We have an oil and gas sector, both doing upstream and downstream work. We've done extensive work for all the multinationals that you can think of, and some of the government oil companies, whether it's NAMCO, a South African oil and gas company in Tanzania, all over the continent. We have experience both from private and public sector perspective. Projects and infrastructure have been involved in some of the biggest infrastructure projects on the continent. One of the big ones that we have been involved in South Africa in particular is also the Gauteng project. And we continuously advise the Gauteng government in respect of expansion of the Gauteng, those who are familiar with Johannesburg, that links the airport, Sandton, the Johannesburg CBD, and also Pretoria. And we've advised some of our biggest corporates, Eskom in particular, although they're going through difficulties in a number of their projects, whether it's the nuclear power program, whether it's the renewables program, and we also act for the developers on the other side and finance companies. So we have extensive experience in that. Private equity, we act for a number of the big private equity companies. And one of my colleagues, Martha, is also here, is one of our members of the private equity team. And then one of the newest sectors that we've created is what we call the industrials, manufacturing and trade sector, and that is with the inauguration of AFCFTA, because we've identified the opportunity that if we look at the laudable objectives under the AFCFTA, what should be achieved and what lawyers should be doing to achieve that for our clients. We have launched the sector because that sector complements all the other sectors. So it focuses on industrialization, it focuses on manufacturing and how clients, whether it's foreign clients coming into the continent, investing on the continent, and then expanding from a regional value chain perspective, or African-based clients, so intra-African trade, so ensuring that that happens. But you can't do it without energy, you can't do it without power, you can't do it without the natural resources that we have on the continent. So we service all the critical sectors to also make sure that we are able to provide those skills as part of our service to clients who want to industrialize on the continent and use the continent, whether it's setting up shop in Johannesburg or in Kigali or in Kenya. We are there to service our clients. And part of that is also looking at future industries. So I personally have a great passion in driving our hydrogen agenda. We have been involved in a number of engagements with governments, private sector, in terms of how Africa should tap into the hydrogen economy. So depth of experience and skills, again, flowing from our expertise in all the other sectors in driving hydrogen and e-mobility. My colleague again, Martha, has been involved in a number of matters for Basigo in Kenya on driving the Kenyan e-mobility agenda also. Then, so that is broadly CDH, but today's discussion is obviously about procurement and contract management, and I have 3 colleagues, including me, that will be discussing it. But what we want to do is also bring in our expertise and skills to not just talk about generally procurement, but give you practical examples in terms of our experience and also engaging with you from your experience in terms of how you've seen procurement evolving and how procurement has been used on the continent in various countries as a tool to ensure that actually we drive also industrialization. So what I want to do next is, I haven't introduced my colleagues. So the agenda for today, so you'll see on your table, there is a panel or a A5 brochure or booklet. That is we have the agenda for the day in that booklet and the topics for discussion. Now, my colleagues that will join me, maybe they can just stand up for a few minutes and everyone can see you. We have not previously seen you. So Imran Abdullah, he's a senior associate from our Johannesburg office, also specializing in public law and public international law and procurement matters. Martha Guya, who's in our corporate practice, specializing in private equity, commercial work, and Desmond, my colleague, also from Kenya, Nairobi, specializing in construction engineering, public procurement work, and dispute settlement in our Kenya office. Thank you, my esteemed colleagues. So today's agenda, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it and we can have an interactive discussion with the colleagues in attendance. So we'll have session 1, which will be about an hour, where we intend to unpack the ABCs for procurement in Africa, as I mentioned, providing East Africa and South African experience on that. And we do welcome questions. So at the end of each of the presenters, please feel free to engage and ask questions and also provide your experience on the issues that are being unpacked. The second session will be using procurement as a tool to achieve sustainable development, and that is looking at local content in particular, and then more granularly ESG also. And I will do that session. Session 3 will be done by Martha, and let's talk about contract. So now you have the contract, and you now need to ensure that you comply and deal with all the management principles and enforce the contract if there's issues. So Martha will deal with that. And then we have an interactive case study. So the case study is at the back of the pack. So you can maybe at this stage go through the case study when you have time. And at the end of the session, we'll have an interactive session. So my colleagues will be on stage. We will divide the room, and we will then have a discussion and questions. And one of the things we will also have is anyone, there's no right answer. So anyone who answers a question and engage, we have a gift for you also. So there's an incentive in performing. So that is the structure that we want to approach our session today. And I think we can then start the first part of the session. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Imran to start his presentation.
Good morning, respected colleagues. Thank you, Jaco, for that introduction. So this session is entitled The ABCs of Procurement and is comprised of two parts, which provides the foundation for the balance of the program this morning. My topic will be limited to principles in procurement, specifically focusing on public procurement and the achievement of value for money. So you will see that the central theme will be achieving value for money. I'll be speaking from the South African context with the hope that lessons can be learned from the perspective of a South African lawyer. Okay, so what is public procurement? Well, public procurement refers to the process through which the state acquires goods and services necessary to fulfill its public functions. And the difference between public procurement and private procurement is that public procurement always supports a public function, or put differently, is a means to a public end. So if, for example, in South Africa, when Eskom purchases coal from the market, it does so to achieve its primary mandate, which is to supply electricity in a stable and efficient manner to the country. But as much as service delivery is vital for growth and development and social welfare, it's equally important for government to ensure that it achieves value for money, given the large sums of money that's associated with public procurement and the inherent limitations on the fiscus. And so this is why public procurement has to be regulated. Before dealing with the regulation of public procurement, it's good to understand what value for money is. Typically, when one thinks of value for money, price comes to mind. However, value for money is something more encompassing than simply achieving the best price. It entails achieving quality goods and services, as well as, importantly, contracting on the best possible commercial terms. So to achieve value for money, procurement systems employ various mechanisms. In South Africa, for example, value for money is achieved through the employment of a system of procurement that must be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. The employment of these principles in South Africa is mandatory because they're enshrined in the South African Constitution. The Supreme Court of Appeal has said that they constitute the minimum requirements for a valid tender process and for the contracts entered into subsequent to that process. Although they may not be mandatory in other systems or even in the private sector, they're universal principles that can be applied in any system to achieve value for money. Now let's unpack this a bit by looking at each of these principles and their individual or collective impacts on achieving value for money. So competition and cost effectiveness. Competition is a common principle, and it's a process where multiple suppliers compete against one another to secure the contract. So competition by its very nature then is designed to push suppliers into providing the best price for the procuring entity, and is therefore crucial to achieving value for money. Cost effectiveness, on the other hand, is a broader concept, and it incorporates, I think, in particular, procedural efficiency. Now, what do I mean by that? So, well, competition itself is not one-dimensional. There's several competitive processes that can be employed, such as a two-stage open bidding process or a request for quotations to a panel of suppliers. And each of these competitive processes has a cost allocated to it. And it may not always be cost effective to resort to certain competitive processes. Say for example, one that requires you to go out to 100 bidders to secure an item of low commercial value. Or a two-stage open bidding process where it's very clear that there's only two suppliers in the market that can provide that good and services. So the cost of the procurement process may very well have an impact on the achievement of value. And in order to achieve value for money, then a procuring entity must strive to strike a balance between procedural efficiency and competition. Transparency. So transparency entails the publication of three things: contract opportunities, the rules that govern that contract, tender process, and the awarding of the contracts. And it also requires a system which, with the availability of a process that you can verify, or third parties can verify whether the rules were followed in awarding that contract. So similar to the relationship between cost effectiveness and competition, transparency also has its own relationship with competition and cost effectiveness, as well as fairness and equity. So transparency in procurement opportunities has the effect of increasing competition by making sure that suppliers know about the opportunities available. Transparency in the rules governing the tender process ensures that bidders submit bids that match the procuring entity's requirements. And then transparency in publishing the awards and providing for a process to verify breeds confidence in the system, all of which contribute to achieving value for money. And lastly, fairness and equity. So fairness and equity is also a broad concept, but it requires procuring entities to treat bidders fairly and to apply the rules governing the tender process equally to all bidders. In other words, it's required to ensure procedural fairness. So based on what I've said about transparency, it goes without saying then that fairness and equity also plays an important role in the system, without which value for money won't be achieved. But procedural fairness is something that shouldn't be applied rigidly. So with respect to rigidity, our Supreme Court has referred to the ever-flexible duty to act fairly. And then in a later judgment, it fleshed this out to mean that fairness must be decided on the circumstances of each case. In some circumstances, it may be fair to ask a tenderer to explain an ambiguity in the tender. It may be fair to allow a tenderer to correct an obvious mistake, for instance. It may, in particularly complex tenders, also be fair to ask for clarification and details required for proper evaluation. The point being then, with respect to these 5 principles, is that whatever is done in the tender process shouldn't cause it to lose its integrity, because that can obviously have a negative impact on value for money, and equally so, applying one principle more favorably over the other principle will impact negatively on value for money. Just before I move on to the next slide, from our experience in South Africa, most judicial review proceedings are brought where there's a violation of one of these principles. So from our perspective, it's always important to ensure that these principles are borne in mind by any procuring entity. Okay. So, although the South African Constitution provides for these 5 principle system, it also specifically states that organs of state are not precluded from implementing a preferential procurement system that's designed to protect and advance categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. So on the face of it, it may seem strange as to why the South African Constitution embodies what is clearly a policy objective, and to others it might be viewed as being something that's contrary to achieving value for money. However, it's important to note that the design of the South African preferential procurement system is located within the history of apartheid, and it's aimed at redressing historical disadvantages and increasing opportunities for those who previously didn't have an opportunity to participate in the country's mainstream economy. I want to dwell a bit on this aspect of public procurement, given that its importance in South Africa, and perhaps preferential policies are also important with respect to the other jurisdictions on the continent. So the impact that the framework has on value for money is that it requires government, like I said earlier, to pay more than it would have had price been the only criteria. In other words, then, there's an understanding that historically disadvantaged tenderers are unable to compete effectively for government contracts by simply offering the best price. But then on the flip side, understanding the importance of cost effectiveness as a factor to government procurement, a dual scale system is employed which allocates points to dual scale system allocates points for contracts of lower value and then fewer points for contracts of significant value. The dual scale system is on the previous slide, where tenders are evaluated on an overall scale of 100 and points are allocated on an 80-20 or a 90-20 scale. Something interesting happened in South Africa recently with this is that in 2017 the Minister of Finance published regulations that dealt with considerably more requirements than what was mandatory in the triple PFA. And this was challenged because it included things like pre-qualification criteria, local content obligations, as well as mandatory subcontracting and evaluation of functional criteria. So it was challenged on the basis that, number one, pre-qualification criteria is unfair and unlawful. And the principal challenge was actually that the minister exceeded his regulation-making powers. Now, the Supreme Court of Appeal agreed and held that the minister did exceed his regulation-making powers. And number two, it also held that, interesting, that pre-qualification criteria is unlawful and was unconstitutional because of its exclusionary nature in the initial stages of the tender process. On appeal to the Constitutional Court, the Constitutional confirmed the aspect that the minister had exceeded his regulation-making powers, but it didn't say anything about the pre-qualification criteria, which meant that the Supreme Court of Appeal judgment on that point remained standing. So as a result of this, the minister published new regulations in the end of 2022, and that required every organ of state, every public entity to develop its own preferential procurement policy. Now that created a frenzy because all of these requirements, pre-qualification criteria, local content requirements, were all stripped from that new piece of regulation. And so it brought an influx and a flood of requests to, for instance, to our office, where we've now had to guide and prepare policies for various organs of state and departments, or confirm what they're doing is in accordance with the Constitution. Which is good for us, but it created a bit of confusion in the market. Okay. Moving on. But the triple PFA is not the only legislation that governs procurement in South Africa. In fact, it's not the primary one either. The primary piece of legislation at the national and provincial level is the Public Finance Management Act, and at local level it's the Municipal Finance Management Act, or the MFMA, or the PFMA. Now these two acts were enacted to ensure that revenue, expenditure, assets, and liabilities of government are managed effectively and efficiently, and they deal with a number of things beyond procurement: budgeting, irregular expenditure, conditions for government guarantees, and so forth. And then with respect to the PFMA, it also then empowers the Minister of Finance and National Treasury to issue instruction notes to departments on various aspects of public finance, as well as specific supply chain management regulations. And they do so periodically and haphazardly sometimes by issuing instructions on how to deal with procurement in emergency situations like COVID-19 or the floods in KZN, which is a province in South Africa, and other issues like that. And then we also have the Construction Industry Development Board Act, which regulates infrastructure procurement, but from the construction aspect only. And then we have another instruction note from National Treasury that deals with the framework for infrastructure development as a whole. So you've got this, again, conflicting sort of set of regulations coming out of one piece of legislation and one regulatory body, and one coming out of National Treasury. And then obviously every supply chain management policy must be followed by each organ or state, and if they don't, actually that can constitute separate grounds of review in a judicial review application. So the takeaways. I've reached the end of my presentation. Just want to go through some takeaways. So although the principles underlying the South African procurement system are sound, it should be apparent by now that they are over-regulated and there isn't much synergy between the various regulations. As one academic writer remarks, South African public procurement is in a state of procurement purgatory, with new rules appearing and disappearing with frequency, with alarming frequency, creating an uncertainty for all procuring entities. And this also was recognized in our State Capture Commission, where Chief Justice Zondo remarked that the sheer number of acts and regulations which address procurement issues makes it very difficult for a conscientious official to get a clear understanding of what's happening. And in the haze of this difficulty and confusion is where opportunities for corruption to occur. So perhaps then the primary takeaway would be that glossy principles are all fair and well and are important, significantly important, but they must be supported by a system of regulation that's clear and simple, as clear and simple as possible at least. And the lack of clarity and simplicity in the rules may lead to a substantial cost in other matters. And a failure to apply rules properly may result in corruption. At the very worst, at the very least, it will result in a failure to achieve value for money by the government. But fortunately, and I'll leave you with this, and somewhat paradoxically, the government has designed a new set of laws, and that's the public procurement bill, which is currently making its way through Parliament. And it's aimed at unifying our system of regulation under a single source of law. There's a lot to say about the bill, but that would require an entirely separate session. And so for now, I think I thank you for listening very attentively, and I'll hand you over to my colleague. Jack, sorry.
You still have to answer some questions.
I'll open up the floor to any questions.
So if there's any questions around, the first part is just the principles underpinning procurement in South Africa in particular, but some of these principles are also universal, wide, getting some perspectives from the room and questions. If there's a distinction.
Yes, thank you so much. From your presentation, I note that the PPFA is limited to preferential procurement. Now the question would be, how about the general procurement? Do we have guidance that speaks to it as in other countries? Because now for the case of Uganda, preferential procurement is catered for under the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Act, under the preferential scheme. Now, from your submission, it seems that there is a whole specific law that caters to preferential procurement. We have some that caters to general procurement.
No, that's correct. But so this is what I meant by the fragmented nature of our system currently. As lawyers, we can navigate it. So when clients come to us for advice, it's easy for us to identify that, look, under the Public Finance Management Act and the regulations under there, specifically Regulation 16A, we're able to find the system of procurement law, and within each procuring entity's own supply chain management policies. And a number of these entities are given free rein to develop their own supply chain management policies and publish them. Excuse me. We can then navigate and find them there, but they're also obliged to implement preferential procurement policy in them. So it simply just speaks to the very fragmented nature of laws in South Africa, which the Public Procurement Code seeks to rectify. On that topic, the Public Procurement Code also will introduce a public procurement regulator, something that's novel in South Africa. We will not have that. And it will then publish its own regulations. And have I answered your question?
My name is Dr. Wale. I'm DG Officer of Public-Private Partnerships in Ogun State, Nigeria.
Yes.
Now, I note that if you look at procurement laws over Africa and in Europe, the primary objective also appears to be impartiality, fairness, and transparency. Now, I note that in South Africa there are a number of laws that deal with the procurement. I'm wondering how this new legislation provides a nexus and brings synergy between all the laws of procurement in South Africa. And I'm particularly interested in that element of preferential treatment. What's the main objective? And how does this take South Africa forward in ensuring that there's continued impartiality and transparency and fairness in procurement?
Okay, so I'll answer that question by taking a top-down approach. So the ensuring impartiality, equity, fairness, those are constitutional principles. So in any piece of law, any conduct, it will have to follow, because that is then tied to the principle of legality, which is fundamental in South African law. So if you, for instance, publish a law that disregards any of these principles, then that law could be struck down. And interesting enough, the bill itself contains elements of, it in fact has a section dealing with pre-qualification, mandatory pre-qualification, notwithstanding the Supreme Court of Appeal said that it's inimical to these five principles. So that's the one thing. And then the other way in which it will attempt to defragment is by repealing the Triple PFA Act, as well as carving out provisions from the Public Finance Management Act, the CIPD Act, which deals with construction, and incorporating it under one long piece of legislation, and giving the regulator, and still the oversight being National Treasury and the Minister of Finance responsibilities for ensuring a singular source of law. I am pretty sure I've missed one or two of your points, but if I've answered generally, thank you.
Take one last question. We'll get to the end for that, but let's take the last two.
Thank you. Just could you give some more detail about the dual scoring for preferential procurement? And secondly, does the preferential procurement system cater for, I saw you mention that it caters for tenderers who have historically been disadvantaged. Would that cover categories such as women, youth, PWDs that I've seen in other jurisdictions where they say, for example, 10% or 30% of government procurement will be allocated to those categories?
I missed the first question.
Just some more explanation about the dual scoring system.
Okay, so the dual scoring system, you know, by its very nature, it's not meant to be radical in its application. It's meant to be gradual, and it's meant to ensure that government spend contributes to transformation. Other programs, for instance, like I said, every entity has its public mandate. So change can be achieved through the public mandate. But specifically with spend, it's meant to ensure that at least there's participation by SMMEs, women for instance, and so forth. But getting to the point, then the allocation is 80 points for price alone, or 90 if the value of the contract meets a certain threshold, and 90-10. And then the 10 points is then given to a specific goal. Now, the Act speaks about a specific goal. Now, a specific goal is something, since the Constitutional Court judgment, that every procuring entity has to develop its own goals. So me, as an organ of state, I can say, well, I see in we want to develop women entrepreneurs, and we will create a subcontracting requirement for that 10-point allocation. And so then that entity will then have that as its specific goal. Another may have local content requirements. So each entity will have its own roles. And this is why, like I mentioned, we have been asked a lot to do a lot of these policy issues. But I think I forgot the question. But did I answer it? Thank you.
So this is related to the second question. I'm just thinking, have there been changes in the law to sort? I know the media usually reports the negative stuff about how the time when there were abuses of BEE, the Black Economic Empowerment, where you find bills signed by somebody who doesn't know anything about the company. A female lady, black, somewhere in the country, signed the document that they don't know. One, was it a problem, or was the media over-exaggerating? And then two, when you have a fragmented law that probably provides an avenue for people to abuse that process, was the abuse as much as the media made it seem, and then have the amendments to the law sort of sorted out what people were doing?
So there's three things to that. The first is that if you do that, you would have violated the tender process, which would mean that that whole tender process is susceptible to judicial review. And if that tender is then set aside, so too does the contracts under that. The second issue is that, for example, the example you used, that could then also be dealt with under the BEE Act for fronting, and that's a criminal offense. And then the third is that it could also be, depending on the severity of the situation, it could be elevated to the special tribunal that has been established to deal specifically with issues of tender corruption. And you're finding the SIU has been given teeth also by the Constitutional Court to deal with administrative reviews also, so you don't have this duality of government having to go to the courts to set it aside, as well as then going to, as well as the prosecuting authority to go to the SI, to the special tribunal to prosecute for these tender violations. Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question.
You're welcome to
Desmond
afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Imran, for that. So on my part, I'd just like to set some context in terms of the regulatory reforms that we've experienced in Kenya. And the reason for this is that the context sets the stage for the Treasury will issue a circular directing how procurement should be conducted by the public entities. Then at the same time, also the Office of the President would also issue a circular on how they think that discretion on what to apply and what not to apply. So as you can imagine, that led to a lot of abuse. So there was then now pressure from the civil society and pressure from the World Bank for reforms on public procurement. Mainly because being the government, they're using public funds, so they have to be accountable for the loans that they're getting from the lenders. So this led now to the enactment of the Public Procurement and Disposal Act of 2005, which was based on the UNCINTRAL model law. And what this did is that it codified the policy, the various ministerial policies that you had, it codified it into now a law that can be used with certainty. The other thing is that the Public Procurement and Disposal Act also brought in institutions that were responsible for overseeing implementation of the public procurement. Some of the institutions that it created was a Public Procurement Regulatory Authority, which is responsible for overseeing implementation of public procurement across all government entities. Then you have the Public Procurement Regulatory Board, which of course is the one that makes decisions on behalf of the authority. And then you have the Public Procurement Administrative Review Board. So one of the fundamental things that the policy makers realized was that there was no mechanism for enforcement. If the government awarded a tender, to a non-responsive bid, there was no way for another bidder to challenge that wrongful award. So it brought in a mechanism now for enforcement, and that was important, and brought in a body that would be responsible for adjudicating disputes on public procurement. Then there were continuous reforms which also now led to, when the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was promulgated, the drafters of the Constitution also felt that it was important to anchor the principles of public procurement in the Constitution so that no gains are clawed back by future members of Parliament. So the principles which Imran has talked about, such as transparency, competition, accountability, were now anchored in the Constitution. The other thing that the Constitution introduced was affirmative action. And I think George mentioned one of the things is there was affirmative action for marginalized groups. And in the context of Kenya, the marginalized groups are women, the youth, and persons with disabilities. So these principles that were enacted in the Constitution were translated to the Public Procurement and Disposal Act of 2015. Now, amendments were done to the Act to operationalize positive steps for affirmative action. And the reforms here are also similar to other jurisdictions. Our case in point is, for instance, in Rwanda. In 2007, 2008, there were also reforms to the public procurement regulatory provisions to institutionalize some of these aspects. So one of the challenges of public procurement is ensuring that there is honesty, objectivity, impartiality, and accountability. Now, to be able to achieve that, it is something that you have to create systems and structures that would create accountability. And how those systems and structures have been created in the different jurisdictions, you have officers responsible for different functions. And the reason for that is that you do not want to concentrate too much power on one particular officer. You want to spread it so to minimize the risk of abuse. And you can see how that has been done in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Tanzania, and in Kenya. The challenge, though, is that with trying to ensure accountability, it also leads to a lot of red tape because you now have to deal with so many officers and so many approvals. And the essence of reforms on the public procurement was to make sure that the system is simple to use. You know, the public are able to use it in a simple manner without compromising its transparency. So one of the ways in which jurisdictions have dealt in trying to promote more efficiency and effectiveness is actually now to leverage on the use of technology. So quite a number of jurisdictions and in East Africa, Rwanda, Kenya and Tanzania have taken the lead in implementing e-procurement. And e-procurement is meant to make the procurement system simpler, but yet anchoring the same principles of transparency. And one of the advantages of e-procurement is that, just like Imran had mentioned, for instance, in the South African experience, to promote transparency, information about the tender has to be readily available. So having an e-platform where this information can be readily accessed by the public is one way of improving that transparency. The ability to be able to track your application is another way of improving that transparency. E-procurement also reduces the risk of corruption because it reduces the face-to-face contacts in the procurement. Instead of bouncing from one officer to another, the less contact you have with the particular officers, the less chances of corruption occurring. Then there's also better participation in the tender process because a lot of time is saved. You can imagine, the requirement of you must submit your bids by 5 p.m. You must be bound in a blue cover, and then it must be sealed in a white envelope. And if your documents get to the office at 5:01 p.m., then you're disqualified. So that locks out many people. All the people within that locality are essentially locked out. So what the e-procurement does is that it enables access, a wider participation by the citizens, as far as possible within the country. Then it also reduces overhead costs because you have less people having to scrutinize, every detail. That can be done using an e-procurement system, depending on the e-procurement software that the government procures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then the other advantage is it also frees up time for the procurement team to focus on more strategic goals for the organization. The challenges with e-procurement, one, it requires a significant investment. To be able to get the technology that enables you to carry out the procurement functions, from the beginning to the end, requires a technology that, is AI enabled. So you find that because of that heavy investment, some of the African countries have, approached it in a staggered fashion. So you get a software that only enables you to have a repository of documents. So people are able, yes, to download the bid documents. They're able to, once they've completed, they're able to upload them onto the system. But it almost ends there. It now resorts back to a manual kind of way of sifting through what's on the database. You find that there's no sufficient investment in an AI technology that processes the data to be able to give data to the procurement entity as to how they can make the procurement more efficient. They can analyze things to do with price, things to do with the quality of goods or services that have been proposed. So the opportunity for using an e-procurement tool is a significant investment, and that's one of the challenges. Then the other challenges to e-procurement is cybersecurity threats. I think for the Kenyans in the room, you are aware that in July we had, a hackathon, they call it, where there were cyber attacks to the platforms the online platforms that the Kenyan government is using, and you could not get any government service for a few days. So cybersecurity, of course, is a challenge. Then the other challenge is training personnel, the personnel that are going to use this technology. It requires a significant investment to be able to train them on how to use it, and also to sensitize the public on the importance of using it. Although for African jurisdictions we use our strong arm, we just announce and say, from today all procurement is through the e-platform, so there's not really much sensitization, much persuasion required in that aspect. So those are the opportunities and challenges for procurement, and I'd love to hear what your experiences have been. The other aspect that I would just like us also to focus on is on the procurement cycle. And I think the procurement cycle it is important for us to consider, because as in your respective role as an in-house counsel, you are asked either to advise or to help either in the procurement planning or particularly in the contract management stage. So it is important for us just to discuss it and see what it entails. So procurement planning, this is a stage where the organization decides what it wants to buy and when it wants to buy it. And why is it important? It is important because you want to have as minimal disruptions as possible during your financial year. You do not want that at some point you have run out of resources to be able to carry out your functions. And because you did not do the planning, you were not aware that you would need a particular item at a particular time. So procurement planning is a critical stage, and the procurement planning is also the stage where you have involvement with different stakeholders. So you have involvement of the production team or product team, you have involvement of finance, you have involvement of the marketing team, you have involvement of legal. And legal especially, because they have to consider what commercial terms are important for this particular, if it's a project, what are the most important commercial terms that have to be preserved when it comes to the contract, drafting the contract. So those considerations have to be brought in at the very early stage during the planning. And my colleague Martha will talk more about contract management. Then within the procurement planning, there's also the procurement schedule, the timelines, when you actually need to procure the goods or services. And then there's the market survey. And market survey is just simply market intelligence. How do you find out about the goods or services in the market? It could be from your own knowledge, it could be from previous experience, it could be an internet search. So if you're using e-procurement, the data analytics will replace previous experience. It will also aid in your own knowledge, because you'll be able to you'll be judging from data and not just a hunch Then, of course, you can ask suppliers or buyers, you can engage a procurement consultant or professional body or industry bodies. So once you've garnered that information, the next step is market analysis. And market analysis is just simply, analyzing to see the level of maturity of the market, depending on the product or service that you're looking to get. And if the goods are something that is readily available, then it also influences the choice of procurement. So most likely then you would use an open tender system if it's something that is readily available. If the service or goods are not available within your jurisdiction, then you consider an alternative procurement method, perhaps direct contracting or a single source selection. So your market analysis is what influences the choice of your procurement. Then finally is sourcing. So I've already talked about identifying the requirements, the method of procurement. Then, of course, now there's the invitation for the bids. Then there's the pre-bid conference or clarification, which is an opportunity for the bidders to ask questions, about the particular bid. And then, of course, now there's a process where they will submit their bids, and then there will be a process of opening the bids, evaluation, and eventually award of the tender. After award of the tender, that's when now we get into the aspect of contract management, which my colleague Martha will speak to a bit later. So, thank you very much. I think I'll stop there.
Questions? Yes, sir? Hopefully there's a lot of burning questions. Comparative law questions. Nothing on the stage.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really good. I'm just interested in your market survey options. So the Ugandan context, we actually, as evidence in the procurement process, actually focus on evidence from suppliers 3. So even if you did an internet search, even if you asked a professional body, you would be required to have the evidence of the suppliers giving an amount to inform your procurement. What I'm wondering is in Kenya, is that requirement also there, or can I actually go get this advice from a professional body and use that from an evidential perspective? Would the procurement not be challenged? Because for us on our side, you really have to have that supplier evidence of this was the amount that the 3 suppliers gave. So even if you did your search, even if you engaged informally, you couldn't use that as a basis to inform your procurement.
Thank you, that's a good question. Because this is at the stage of the market survey, in Kenya you are allowed to engage a procurement consultant for purposes of informing you on what kind of price, in terms of the expectations that that you would get for, what value for money, just for the planning purposes. But it is not after you've already prepared the bid documents that now you go back to use the report of the consultant to be based on the bids that have been presented in terms of finding which is the most responsive bid.
Any other question?
very thankful. Well, I work for a company that doesn't have to do public procurement. I noticed that public procurement makes everyone unhappy. It makes everybody unhappy. The procuring entity is saying we have too much paperwork, we have to wait 30 days for something, then the bidders are saying, you know, this process will take so long, let's factor that in the price, so the price is usually higher. Government entities are auditing everything, including how many T-bags you buy. And the process seems very, very long, and I think it's mainly because of the conflict between making quick decisions, which is really a factor. That's a value for money question, and then the question, the issue of accountability and transparency. In Uganda, we have procurement regulations for everything. The procurement process a local government follows is totally different from what, let's say, a statutory entity would follow. And that is now where you have the definition of the devil in the detail. Either it will seem so protracted that your planning will have to really take into account so many things, or you will find, I once worked in a public entity where it took us 4 years to procure a contractor for a building, and by the time we had done it, the price was double what the bid was, and only because of our PPDA requirements. So how do you reconcile the need to follow business principles, which is really what governments should be doing, then the bureaucracy or the need for accountability, which is a good need, but sometimes, you know, takes away the joy of procurement. First of all, does it happen everywhere, anywhere else? And then how do the changes in procurement take into account, especially the business side of it?
Okay. I don't have an easy answer to that. I think it is. It is something that we have to keep on discussing and talking to each other, and also benchmarking with other jurisdictions. I think the African context is unique in the sense that our primary objective is to develop trust. That seems to be what is really focused on, developing trust. So, the citizens are, usually they distrust the public sector, whether legitimately or not. So creating that flexibility, I think, can only be achieved if we now go into embracing now e-procurement, where some of the, yes, fully, we are now, most of these functions are now automated. You do not now depend on, somebody having to sit on at his desk to carry out some of these functions. So I think technology is the route that we should fully embrace, and AI technology for that matter.
Thanks, Jason. Any other question before we go to answer the question? Before you?
Thank you, Desmond. That was really insightful. I think one challenge we face, especially in the banking sectors, is the lack of, for lack of a better word, standardization in the requirements, like for our customers. So we normally would be required sometimes to give a reference letter, and some of the things that you're being asked to confirm, including that the client is a going concern, or they have an average of X amount of trade volume, and some of those things, you can't quite confirm. You can only confirm a factual position, like what's in the account, with their consent, that sort of thing. So, do you see a future where some of these procurement requirements, because it's burdensome even to the client, I really empathize with them, and it's time bound. So you can imagine now going back to them and saying, that line, 2 lines, we can't do, and they get frustrated, but only because the entity is requiring this. So do you see a case where we can have some of the simplified, standardized, and factual based?
Okay, I know for one, the reason why you find different requirements is sometimes the procurement entity intentionally comes up with qualifications to disqualify, to disqualify particular players. So they are sort of doing their sifting at that stage. So they'll now say we need proof of funds of X amount of dollars, and they're simply just, they know who they want to give the tender to. So they are using that as a disqualification. But I think the challenge is to the procurement entity to consider the choice of procurement, because it's not in all situations where an open tender is the best form of procurement. So I think that is where the procurement entity now needs to go back and look at it. If there are too many players in the market, then maybe just use a different, And then also you find, as part of market analysis, they probably know that if we introduce a requirement like the reference letter or a license, you will only get 2 people. Out of 2,000, only 2 people have that license. So I think it is something, a challenge for the procurement entity.